Hey everyone, get ready to dive into today's story, a roller coaster of betrayal, resilience, and self-discovery. This real-life account takes us to a bustling city in the United States where a 25-year-old woman named Sophia finds herself in the fight of her life. The year is 2022, and Sophia's seemingly perfect marriage to her charming husband, Daniel, starts unraveling when she discovers a shocking truth. Daniel, who had swept her off her feet just 2 years earlier, wasn't the loving partner she thought he was. Behind his warm smile and grand gestures was a man with a hidden agenda, to use their marriage as a means to secure residency in the U.S. As if that betrayal wasn't enough, Sophia also uncovers evidence of an affair that had been ongoing for most of their relationship. This powerful story, originally shared anonymously on trending Reddit stories by a user dubbed u/rebuildsophia, took the internet by storm. It sparked heated debates on forums like r/am I the a-hole and r/relationship advice, with thousands weighing in on Sophia's courageous decision to confront Daniel and reclaim her life. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted or faced the challenge of rebuilding your life after betrayal, Sophia's journey will resonate deeply. So grab a coffee, settle in, and let's unravel this tale of heartbreak, empowerment, and the ultimate fight for justice. And as always, don't forget to share your thoughts. What would you have done in Sophia's shoes? Now, let's jump into the story and see how Sophia turned her pain into strength. Sophia never imagined she would fall head over heels so quickly. At just 22, she was bright-eyed, ambitious, and full of dreams about her future. Her life felt steady and predictable, but that all changed the day she met Daniel. He was magnetic, charming in a way that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. With his warm brown eyes and an accent that hinted at his exotic roots, Daniel seemed to have stepped straight out of a fairy tale. Their first encounter was unremarkable at first, a mutual friends party where Daniel's confident demeanor set him apart. But as the night went on, their conversations deepened. He spoke passionately about his dreams, his family back home, and his plans to build a better life in America. His ambition resonated with Sophia, and before she knew it, she was laughing at his jokes and sharing her own hopes and goals. By the end of the evening, Daniel had her number and left her with a lingering smile. The relationship escalated quickly. Within weeks, Daniel showered Sophia with grand gestures, spontaneous weekend getaways, handwritten notes left on her desk, and surprise dinners. Her friends couldn't stop teasing her about how smitten she was, but Sophia didn't care. "He gets me," she often told them, and it felt true. He seemed to know exactly what to say and do to make her feel special. Even her parents, who were often skeptical of Sophia's past boyfriends, were charmed by Daniel's politeness and his eager desire to make a good impression. He brought her mother flowers and helped her father fix a broken gate, winning them over with his generosity. "He's a keeper," her mom said one evening after Daniel had left. For Sophia, those words felt like a seal of approval she didn't realize she needed. But not everyone was sold on their whirlwind romance. Sophia's best friend, Emily, raised an eyebrow at how fast things were moving. "You've only known him for a few months, and you're already talking about moving in together? Doesn't that seem a little rushed?" Emily's voice carried concern rather than judgment. Sophia brushed it off, chalking up her friend's skepticism to overprotectiveness. What really solidified Sophia's commitment was Daniel's vulnerability. One evening, after a candlelit dinner, he shared how difficult life had been growing up in his home country. He painted a picture of struggle, of growing up in poverty, of dreaming about the opportunities America could offer, and of the sacrifices his family made to get him here. Tears welled in his eyes as he spoke about his mother, who he hadn't seen in years. "I want to give her a better life someday," he confessed. Sophia's heart broke for him. By their 8th month together, Daniel proposed. It wasn't extravagant or over the top, just the two of them on a beach during sunset. The simplicity of it melted her heart. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She believed in their love and their shared dreams. Their wedding was small and intimate, held in a quaint backyard setting. As they exchanged vows, Sophia felt the weight of every promise they made. She envisioned a life filled with love, partnership, and adventure. Daniel promised to cherish her forever, to always prioritize their dreams, and to build a family with her. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Sophia's parents and friends celebrated the union, but Emily couldn't shake her unease. "Are you sure this is the right choice?" she asked once more before the wedding. Sophia, with her heart set on a bright future, replied with certainty, "He's my soulmate." For Sophia, the marriage marked the beginning of a beautiful journey. But little did she know, the fairy tale would soon reveal cracks she couldn't yet see. The first few weeks of marriage felt like a dream. Sophia and Daniel moved into a cozy apartment on the outskirts of the city, a place where they could start their new life together. Sophia poured her heart into making their apartment a home, picking out soft throw pillows, decorating the walls with photos from their wedding, and even starting a little herb garden on the windowsill. Daniel seemed happy, though he was often distracted by his phone or buried in emails. "Work stuff," he'd say with a tired smile when she asked. Sophia didn't think much of it at first. After all, she knew Daniel was driven, and his ambition was one of the things that had drawn her to him in the first place. She convinced herself that this was just part of the adjustment to married life. But then, little things started to add up. Daniel began staying late at work more often, sometimes coming home hours after dinner was cold. When Sophia would ask about his day, his answers were vague and hurried, as though he couldn't wait to change the subject. He had never been like this before. In the months they dated, he was always eager to share details about his work, his dreams, and his plans for the future. Now, his responses felt like carefully measured sound bites. One evening, as Sophia cleaned up after dinner, Daniel's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a notification from a messaging app she didn't recognize. Curious, she glanced at the name on the notification. It was in a language she couldn't read. "Daniel, someone messaged you," she called out. His reaction was immediate and unsettling. Daniel rushed into the kitchen, grabbing his phone off the counter with a nervous laugh. "Oh, it's just a friend from back home," he said, shoving the phone into his pocket. "Nothing important." Sophia wanted to believe him, but something about his body language felt off. He wouldn't meet her eyes, and his movements were uncharacteristically jittery. She told herself she was overthinking things. After all, Daniel had never given her a reason to doubt him before. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. On more than one occasion, Sophia caught Daniel taking phone calls late at night in hushed tones. When she'd ask who he was talking to, he'd wave her off. "Just work," he'd say with a tired sigh. She didn't press further, not wanting to seem like the paranoid wife. One Saturday morning, as she folded laundry, Sophia found an unfamiliar envelope tucked inside the pocket of Daniel's jacket. It was addressed to him from an immigration attorney. Her stomach churned. They had talked about Daniel's visa before, but he had always brushed it off as something routine. Why would he need an attorney? When Daniel came home that afternoon, Sophia decided to confront him. She held up the envelope, her voice steady but firm. "I found this in your jacket. What's going on, Daniel?" His face paled, and for a moment he looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then, just as quickly, he recovered, flashing her the easy smile that had always disarmed her. "Oh, that? It's nothing. Just paperwork I need to finalize for my work visa. Don't worry about it." Sophia nodded slowly, though the unease in her chest didn't fade. She wanted to trust him, needed to trust him, but the feeling that something wasn't right had taken root and refused to let go. The cracks in their relationship grew more noticeable as the weeks passed. Daniel became more distant, his phone constantly in hand, the screen turned away from her. He started canceling plans at the last minute, claiming he was swamped with work. One night, as she sat alone in their dimly lit living room, staring at a dinner table set for two, Sophia couldn't help but wonder, was this really what marriage was supposed to feel like? Her breaking point came when she stumbled upon yet another clue that she couldn't ignore. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter, and Sophia, intending to close it, saw an email on the screen. The subject line read, "Urgent, next steps for adjustment of status." Her heart raced as she skimmed the message. It was from the same immigration attorney, detailing documents and processes Daniel needed to complete his application for permanent residency. Her mind reeled. Why hadn't he told her about this? They were married. Shouldn't they be sharing everything? Questions buzzed in her head. Was their marriage part of his next steps? Had he married her simply to secure his place in the country? That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of their relationship in her mind. The way he had swept her off her feet, the grand gestures, his vulnerable stories about his past, it all felt so real back then. But now, a dark shadow had been cast over those memories. Sophia finally decided she couldn't keep her concerns bottled up any longer. The next morning, she confronted Daniel again, her voice trembling but resolute. "I need the truth, Daniel. What's going on with your immigration status? And why didn't you tell me you're working with an attorney?" Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sophia, you're overthinking this," he said, his tone dismissive. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to worry you. It's just technicalities. Nothing serious." But Sophia wasn't convinced. The tension between them was palpable, an invisible wall that seemed to grow taller with each passing day. Though Daniel's words were meant to reassure her, they only deepened her doubts. She began to question everything: his actions, his motives, and most painfully, whether their love had ever been real. As the days went by, Sophia's anxiety grew. The marriage that once seemed like a fairy tale was now shrouded in secrecy and suspicion. Deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of the unraveling, but she wasn't ready to face what might come next. For now, she clung to the hope that she was wrong, that the man she had fallen in love with was still somewhere in the midst of all this confusion. But hope, as she was beginning to learn, could only carry her so far. If you were Sophia, would you trust Daniel's promise? What do you think she should do when she detects these first signs? The tension between Sophia and Daniel was now impossible to ignore. Though she tried to convince herself that things were just a little rocky because of work stress or the adjustments of married life, deep down, she knew something was wrong. The laughter that once filled their apartment had been replaced by silence. The loving gestures Daniel had once been so eager to offer now seemed like distant memories. And more, Sophia felt like she was living with a stranger. Daniel's behavior became increasingly erratic. He often came home late, sometimes after midnight, with vague explanations about work emergencies or last-minute meetings. When Sophia asked questions, he'd grow defensive, brushing her off as if her concerns were trivial. "You're always questioning me," he snapped one evening, after she asked why he hadn't answered her calls all day. "I'm working hard for us, Sophia. Can't you just trust me?" Sophia wanted to trust him, desperately. But his defensiveness only added fuel to her doubts. And it wasn't just his late nights that bothered her. Even when Daniel was home, he wasn't really there. He would sit on the couch, scrolling through his phone or typing furiously on his laptop, barely acknowledging her presence. When she tried to start a conversation, he would respond with monosyllabic answers or tell her he was too tired to talk. One night, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, the silence was deafening. Sophia had made one of Daniel's favorite dishes, chicken parmesan with a side of garlic bread, but he barely touched his plate. He was distracted, glancing at his phone every few minutes. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling, "what's going on? You've been so distant lately. It feels like you're not even trying to make this work." He sighed heavily, putting his fork down and rubbing his temples. "I don't know what you want from me, Sophia. I'm doing my best here. Work is stressful, and I don't need to come home to this interrogation." "Interrogation?" she echoed, stunned. "I'm not interrogating you. I'm trying to understand why it feels like we're falling apart." Daniel shook his head, muttering something under his breath before standing up and leaving the room. Sophia sat alone at the table, staring at his untouched plate, tears welling in her eyes. The turning point came a few days later. Sophia was doing laundry when she noticed a crumpled piece of paper sticking out of Daniel's jacket pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she realized what it was: a receipt from a hotel downtown. The date on the receipt was from the previous week, one of the nights Daniel had claimed to be working late. Her hands trembled as she held the paper, a million thoughts racing through her mind. Why would Daniel be at a hotel? Was he meeting someone there? Was this the evidence of infidelity she had feared all along? When Daniel came home that evening, Sophia confronted him. She held up the receipt, her voice shaking. "Care to explain this?" He froze, his eyes darting to the paper in her hand. For a moment, he looked like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, but then his expression hardened and he scoffed. "Seriously, Sophia? You're going through my stuff now?" "That's not an answer," she shot back, her anger outweighing her fear. "Why were you at a hotel? Who were you with?" Daniel rolled his eyes, crossing his arms defensively. "I needed a break, okay? I was stressed, and I wanted some time to myself. There's nothing wrong with that." "A break?" Sophia repeated, her voice rising. "From what? From me? From our marriage?" "You're overreacting," he said dismissively. "It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal to Sophia. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. His casual dismissal of her concerns only deepened her suspicion. Over the next few days, she began to notice more and more signs that something was amiss. His phone, which he used to leave lying around the apartment, was now always within arm's reach. He started locking his laptop when he wasn't using it, something he'd never done before. And then there were the text messages, quick flashes of notifications from unfamiliar names, always dismissed with a swipe before she could see more. Sophia tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, that she was letting her insecurities get the best of her. But the pit in her stomach wouldn't go away. One evening, as she sat alone on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through her phone, she stumbled across an article about signs of emotional distancing in relationships. Each bullet point felt like a checklist for her marriage. Unexplained absences, secretive behavior, lack of communication. The article concluded with a sobering line: "Trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is." The realization hit her like a freight train. This wasn't just a rough patch or a phase. Something was off, and unless she confronted it head-on, it would only get worse. The next morning, Sophia made an appointment with a therapist. She didn't tell Daniel, unsure of how he would react. But she knew she needed to talk to someone, to sort through her feelings and figure out what to do next. During her first session, she poured her heart out, recounting everything from the hotel receipt to the late-night phone calls. The therapist listened intently, offering gentle guidance and validation. By the end of the session, Sophia felt a small flicker of hope, like maybe, just maybe, she could find the strength to face whatever lay ahead. But that hope was short-lived. Just 2 days later, Sophia found another clue: a cryptic email on Daniel's laptop, left open on the kitchen counter. The subject line read, "Follow-up on visa application." Her chest tightened as she read the first few lines. It was an exchange between Daniel and an immigration officer discussing the next steps in his residency process. And then the kicker: "Please ensure your marriage documentation remains up to date." Sophia's blood ran cold. The words were like a punch to the gut. Could it be possible that Daniel had married her for the sole purpose of securing his residency? The thought was almost too painful to bear, but it was becoming harder and harder to ignore. As she closed the laptop, her hands shaking, Sophia felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. The hotel receipt, the late nights, the secretive emails. It all pointed to a truth she wasn't ready to face. The man she had fallen in love with, the man she had promised to spend her life with, was no longer the man she thought he was. And as much as she wanted to believe there was still hope for their marriage, a small, painful voice in the back of her mind whispered otherwise. This is only the beginning. Sophia is starting to feel abandoned in her own marriage. If you were in her shoes, how would you deal with the coldness from your partner? Sophia had been feeling the cracks in her marriage for weeks now, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to uncover. The doubts and suspicions that had quietly gnawed at her were about to erupt into a truth she could no longer ignore. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening. Daniel had come home late again, muttering something about an urgent project at work. Sophia had given up asking for details, knowing she'd only get vague answers or another dismissive excuse. He dropped his bag by the door and retreated to their bedroom, phone in hand, as Sophia busied herself cleaning up the remnants of dinner. She had just finished loading the dishwasher when she heard his voice, low and tense, muffled by the thin walls of their apartment. Sophia paused, a strange sense of foreboding settling over her. It wasn't unusual for Daniel to take calls in private these days, but something about his tone caught her attention. Quietly, she stepped closer to the bedroom door, her heart pounding as she strained to hear his words. "Yes, I know," Daniel said, his voice sharper than usual. "I'm almost done with everything. Just a few more weeks, and then I'll leave. She won't see it coming." Sophia froze. Her mind scrambled to make sense of what she was hearing. Was he talking about work? A project? Something else? "No, she has no idea," he continued, his tone almost smug. "She thinks I'm still in this marriage for love. It's pathetic, really. But once the paperwork is finalized, I'm out. This whole thing has been more exhausting than I thought." Sophia felt like the ground beneath her feet had been ripped away. She clutched the edge of the wall for support, her breath coming in shallow gasps. There was no mistaking what he meant. He was talking about her. Their marriage, the life she thought they were building together. Tears pricked at her eyes as she listened to Daniel laugh quietly at something the other person said. She wanted to burst into the room, to confront him right then and there, but her instincts told her to wait. She needed more than just this conversation. She needed proof. When Daniel finally ended the call and walked out of the bedroom, Sophia quickly composed herself, pretending to be busy folding a dish towel. He barely acknowledged her as he grabbed a glass of water and disappeared back into the bedroom. That night, as Daniel slept soundly beside her, Sophia lay awake, her mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and they painted a picture she wished she could unsee. The late nights, the secretive behavior, the hotel receipt, it all made sense now. She realized with a sickening certainty that Daniel had never truly loved her. From the very beginning, he had been using her as a means to an end. Sophia knew what she had to do. Over the next few days, she began collecting evidence, determined to uncover the full extent of Daniel's betrayal. She started with his phone. While he was in the shower one morning, she unlocked it using the passcode she'd memorized months ago. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through his messages, her worst fears confirmed with every notification. There were texts from a woman named Elena, messages filled with inside jokes, affectionate nicknames, and plans to meet up. Some of the messages were explicit, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "I can't wait until we can finally be together without hiding," one message read. "Soon, babe," Daniel had replied. "Just let me finish tying up loose ends with Sophia." Sophia felt like she was going to be sick. She took screenshots of the messages and emailed them to herself before quickly locking the phone and putting it back in its place. Her next step was Daniel's laptop. Late one night, after he had fallen asleep, Sophia crept into the living room and opened his computer. She sifted through his emails, finding correspondence with his immigration attorney and even more damning messages to Elena. One email in particular made her stomach churn. "Thanks for helping me navigate this process," Daniel had written to his attorney. "Once the green card comes through, I'll be free to move on. I just need to make sure Sophia doesn't catch on until then." Sophia's hands shook as she forwarded the email to herself. Her anger and heartbreak were a storm raging inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. She needed to stay focused. The final piece of evidence came a few days later when she overheard another call between Daniel and Elena. This time, Sophia recorded the conversation on her phone, capturing every damning word as Daniel discussed their future together and his plans to leave Sophia once his residency was secure. With the evidence in hand, Sophia sat alone in their living room that night, staring at the screen of her phone. She replayed the recording over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. She thought about the man she had fallen in love with, the promises he had made, and the life they were supposed to share. And now, she was left with the devastating truth. It had all been a lie. Sophia wanted to crumble under the weight of it all, but she knew she couldn't. She wouldn't let Daniel's deceit define her. Gathering her courage, she resolved to confront him, not out of anger, but out of a need to reclaim her dignity and take back control of her life. "What would you do?" she whispered to herself. "If the person you loved had lied to you and used you, would you have the courage to stand up and face them?" As she prepared for the confrontation, Sophia felt a strange mix of fear and determination. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain: she would no longer be a pawn in Daniel's game. Tomorrow, the truth would come out, and Sophia would finally take the first step toward freeing herself from the web of lies she had unknowingly been caught in. The air in the apartment felt thick with tension as Sophia prepared herself for what she knew would be one of the hardest moments of her life. She had spent the last few days replaying Daniel's lies in her head, feeling her heartbreak give way to anger. She wasn't the naive girl he thought he could manipulate anymore. Tonight, she was going to confront him, lay everything bare, and demand the truth, no matter how much it hurt. Daniel arrived home late, as usual, offering nothing more than a half-hearted "hey" as he kicked off his shoes. Sophia was waiting in the living room, sitting upright on the couch with her phone and laptop in front of her. Her heart raced as he walked past her toward the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing in her chest. "Daniel," she called out, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "We need to talk." He paused, glancing at her with mild irritation. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "No," she said firmly, her eyes locking onto his. "It can't." Her tone must have caught his attention because he reluctantly joined her in the living room, leaning against the armrest of the couch with his arms crossed. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice laced with impatience. Sophia didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached for her phone and played the recording of his call with Elena. The room filled with Daniel's voice, clear and damning as he spoke about his plans to leave Sophia once his residency was secure. His smug laugh echoed in the small space, and the color drained from Daniel's face. When the recording ended, Sophia stared at him, her hands trembling, but her resolve unshaken. "Care to explain?" she asked, her voice sharp. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, searching for the right words. "That's not what it sounds like," he finally stammered. Sophia laughed bitterly. "Not what it sounds like. You literally said you're planning to leave me. You called our marriage exhausting. How else am I supposed to take that?" He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration boiling over. "Sophia, you don't understand. I was venting. I didn't mean any of it." "Oh, really?" she shot back, grabbing her laptop. She pulled up the screenshots of his texts with Elena, his emails to the immigration attorney, and the hotel receipt she had kept as proof. Was this also just venting? Were you venting when you were planning a future with her behind my back? When you called me pathetic for trusting you? Daniel's face twisted in anger, the guilt in his eyes quickly replaced with defensiveness. "You went through my stuff?" he barked. "That's a violation of my privacy, Sophia. You had no right." "Are you serious right now?" Sophia's voice rose as she stood, unable to contain her fury any longer. "You're trying to make me the bad guy? You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and using me, and you're upset because I found out?" Daniel took a step closer, his voice dropping to a cold, calculated tone. "You always make yourself the victim, don't you? Maybe if you weren't so gullible, you wouldn't have ended up in this situation. Did you ever think about that?" Sophia's breath hitched as his words cut through her. She felt the sting of his cruelty but refused to let it break her. "So it's my fault you lied to me?" she asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "My fault you married me under false pretenses? Tell me the truth, Daniel. Was any of this real? Did you ever love me, or was I just a stepping stone for you?" For a moment, Daniel said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't plan for it to be like this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "At first, yes, I needed the marriage for my residency, but I did try to love you, Sophia. I really did." Sophia felt her knees weaken as the final piece of her heart shattered. The man she had loved, the man she had built her life around, had just confirmed her worst fears. Her voice broke as she asked, "Try? You tried to love me? Like I was some obligation you had to fulfill?" Daniel looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I didn't want to hurt you," he said, as if that absolved him of the pain he had caused. Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't want to hurt me? Every single choice you made hurt me. Every lie, every betrayal. It all hurt. And you don't even care, do you?" Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Sophia held up her hand, stopping him. "I'm done," she said firmly. I'm done with your excuses, your lies, all of it. You can have your residency, your new life, whatever it is you think you need, but you can't have me." She turned and walked to the bedroom, her mind racing as she grabbed a suitcase and began packing her things. Daniel followed her, his protests growing louder. "Sophia, you're being irrational. You can't just leave." "I can, and I will," she said without looking at him. "I deserve better than this. Better than you." By the time she zipped up her suitcase and walked out the door, Sophia felt a strange sense of relief. The pain was still there, raw and aching, but so was a newfound strength. She had faced the truth, confronted the man who had betrayed her, and chosen herself for the first time in a long time. As she stepped into the cool night air, Sophia realized that this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would rebuild, heal, and find peace on her own terms. And no matter how hard the road ahead might be, she knew she had made the right choice. Because for the first time in months, Sophia felt free. Sophia's hands trembled as she signed the divorce papers. The weight of her decision sat heavily on her chest, but she knew it was the only way forward. The confrontation with Daniel had left her shattered, but it also gave her clarity. She needed to reclaim her life, to protect herself from further harm, and to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. The next day, she met with an immigration attorney to discuss her options. As much as she wanted to move on, Sophia knew she couldn't let Daniel walk away unscathed. She explained everything, the evidence she had collected, his admission of using her for residency, and the affair. The attorney listened carefully before advising her to report the situation to immigration services. "This is not just about you, Sophia," the attorney said gently. "What Daniel did is a violation of immigration law, and it's important that the authorities are aware. Reporting him might feel like reopening wounds, but it's a necessary step for justice." Sophia nodded, her resolve hardening. She filed a formal complaint with the appropriate authorities, providing all the evidence she had gathered. It wasn't an easy decision, part of her feared retaliation from Daniel, but she refused to let him manipulate her any longer. The weeks that followed were grueling. The divorce process was emotionally draining, and the legal proceedings with immigration added another layer of stress. Sophia spent countless hours on calls with lawyers, answering emails, and reliving painful memories as she recounted her story. There were moments when she felt like giving up, when the weight of it all seemed too much to bear. But she wasn't alone. Her friends and family rallied around her, offering unwavering support. Emily, her best friend, became her rock, showing up with takeout and wine on the nights when Sophia felt like she couldn't keep going. Her parents, once skeptical of her marriage, enveloped her with love and encouragement. "You're doing the right thing," her mother said one evening as they sat on the couch. "It's hard now, but you're standing up for yourself. That takes so much courage." Despite the support, Sophia couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as she watched Daniel's life unravel. The woman he had been having an affair with, Elena, left him as soon as she learned the truth about his marriage and his intentions. Sophia wasn't sure how Elena found out. Perhaps it was the investigation, or maybe Daniel had let something slip, but the fallout was swift. "You lied to me," Elena had reportedly screamed at him in the middle of their favorite cafe, according to a mutual acquaintance. "You used me just like you used her." Word spread quickly, and Daniel's reputation took a nosedive. His coworkers began to distance themselves, and his boss put him on indefinite leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Without steady income or the support of his lover, Daniel's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. One day, Sophia received a message from a number she didn't recognize. It was Daniel. "Sophia, please," the message began. "I know I messed up, but I need your help. They're threatening to deport me. I'll lose everything. Can we talk? Just one chance to make things right?" Sophia stared at the message for a long time, her emotions warring inside her. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to let him face the consequences of his actions without her interference. Another part of her felt a flicker of pity for the man who had once been her husband. In the end, she didn't respond. She deleted the message and blocked the number. Daniel's choices had led him to this point, and it wasn't her responsibility to save him. As the months passed, the investigation concluded. Immigration services determined that Daniel had entered into the marriage under false pretenses, using Sophia to secure his residency. His visa was revoked, and he was ordered to leave the country. Sophia felt a mix of emotions when she heard the news. Relief that justice had been served. Sadness for the man she had loved and the future they had once imagined. And pride for the strength she had found within herself to stand up and fight for what was right. Daniel's departure was quiet and unceremonious. There were no goodbyes, no last attempts to reconcile. By the time he boarded a plane back to his home country, Sophia had already begun to rebuild her life. She moved out of the apartment they had shared, finding a cozy studio in a new neighborhood. She threw herself into her work, discovering a passion for mentoring young women in her field. She joined a local book club and started attending yoga classes, slowly piecing together a life that was hers alone. One evening, as she sat on her balcony watching the sunset, Sophia reflected on how far she had come. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. She had taken control of her story, choosing to turn her pain into growth. The scars from her marriage would always be there, but they served as a reminder of her resilience. Sophia had learned to trust herself again, to listen to her instincts, and to value her worth. For Daniel, the price of his deceit was steep, losing not only his residency but also the respect of those around him. But for Sophia, the experience had given her something far more valuable: the strength to stand tall in the face of adversity, and the courage to embrace the life she deserved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophia smiled to herself, a sense of peace washing over her. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was ready for it. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. The air was crisp and fresh as Sophia stepped out of her car, gazing at the unfamiliar city skyline before her. This was it, a new city, a new home, and a new chapter of her life. Her divorce had been finalized a month earlier, and with the paperwork finally behind her, she had packed up her belongings and left the city that held so many painful memories. For the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her life. The apartment Sophia had chosen was small but cozy, a sunlit studio on a quiet street. Unpacking her things, she felt an unexpected sense of relief. Each item she placed on the shelves or hung on the walls felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Gone were the framed wedding photos and mementos of a life she no longer wanted. In their place were books she loved, photos of her family and friends, and a vision board filled with dreams she was determined to pursue. But healing was not a linear process. While Sophia embraced her newfound independence, there were moments when the scars from her marriage resurfaced. She would catch herself second-guessing her decisions or doubting her ability to trust others. Sometimes, the memories of Daniel's betrayal would creep in, threatening to pull her back into the pain she had fought so hard to escape. Instead of pushing those feelings away, Sophia learned to face them head-on. She sought therapy, where she worked through her emotions and gained tools to rebuild her confidence. Her therapist encouraged her to practice self-compassion, reminding her that healing takes time. Slowly but surely, Sophia began to forgive herself. Not for what had happened, but for the moments when she had ignored her instincts, for the times she had stayed silent when she should have spoken up. One of the biggest lessons Sophia learned was the importance of setting boundaries. In her marriage, she had often prioritized Daniel's needs above her own, sacrificing her own well-being to keep the peace. Now, she was determined never to let that happen again. She practiced saying no, standing firm in her decisions, and valuing her own feelings as much as she valued others. Sophia also found solace in giving back to her community. She joined a local organization that supported survivors of domestic abuse and unhealthy relationships, volunteering her time to mentor others who were navigating their own journeys of healing. Sharing her story wasn't easy at first, but as she spoke to women who had faced similar struggles, Sophia realized the power of vulnerability. Her story became a source of hope for others, a reminder that it was possible to rise from the ashes of heartbreak and rebuild a life worth living. "Your strength inspires me," one woman told her during a support group meeting. "Hearing how you stood up for yourself gives me hope that I can do the same." Those words stayed with Sophia, reinforcing her commitment to living a life of purpose and authenticity. She threw herself into her work, excelling in her career while finding ways to balance her personal life. She made time for herself, exploring hobbies she had always wanted to try: painting, hiking, even learning to play the piano. For the first time, she was living for herself, and it felt liberating. Of course, the journey wasn't without its challenges. Trust was still a fragile thing for Sophia. Meeting new people, especially potential romantic interests, brought up old fears. She worried about being deceived again, about opening her heart only to have it broken. But rather than let those fears control her, Sophia chose to approach relationships with caution and self-awareness. She reminded herself of the lessons she had learned: to trust her intuition, to prioritize communication and honesty, and to walk away from anything that didn't serve her well. She knew that love, when it came again, would be on her terms, and only with someone who valued and respected her. As Sophia's life began to blossom, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. There were moments when the pain felt unbearable, when she had questioned whether she could ever move on. But now, looking at the woman she had become, she felt a profound sense of pride. She had faced her darkest days and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever. Her story, she realized, wasn't just about overcoming betrayal. It was about discovering her own strength, learning to value herself, and choosing to live with purpose. Sophia had turned her pain into power, and in doing so, she had created a life that was truly hers. Her advice to others was simple yet profound: choose yourself first. Sophia had learned that self-love was not selfish, it was necessary. Prioritizing her own well-being allowed her to show up as her best self, not just for herself, but for those around her. Set boundaries. She often reminded others of the importance of saying no and standing firm in their values. Boundaries weren't walls to keep people out. They were bridges to healthy relationships. Listen to your intuition. Looking back, Sophia wished she had trusted her gut sooner. She encouraged others to pay attention to that inner voice. It often knows the truth long before we do. Give back. Finding purpose in helping others had been a cornerstone of Sophia's healing. It reminded her that even in pain, there was the opportunity to bring light to someone else's life. As Sophia stood on the balcony of her new apartment, the city lights twinkling in the distance, she took a deep breath. The future felt wide open, filled with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to dream of before. Her wounds hadn't disappeared, but they no longer defined her. She was stronger now, ready to embrace whatever came next. And as she gazed out at the horizon, Sophia couldn't help but smile. Her story was far from over. It was just beginning. What about you? She thought, reflecting on the women she had met in her support groups and those who might hear her story in the future. What will your new chapter look like? For Sophia, life was no longer about just surviving. It was about thriving, about living fully, about being useful not just to herself, but to the world around her. And for that, she was endlessly grateful.